Emma sighed as she walked through her quiet house. The silence that greeted her these days still felt strange. After 18 years of noise, laughter, and the constant presence of her son Jack, the emptiness echoed around her. 3 months since he left for college, and she was still adjusting to living alone. She poured herself a glass of wine and settled onto the couch. Friday night used to mean family movie nights or driving Jack to friends' houses. Now it meant just her, a good book, and the freedom to do whatever she wanted. Emma wasn't sure if she loved this freedom or hated it. At 40, she found herself rediscovering who she was beyond being Jack's mother. The divorce 5 years ago had been painful but necessary. Her ex-husband Robert had grown distant, their relationship reduced to sharing a house and parenting responsibilities. When he finally admitted he'd fallen in love with someone else, it hurt less than she expected. Emma ran her fingers through her long brown hair and took another sip of wine. The house was warm despite the autumn chill outside. She decided to take advantage of her solitude and treat herself to a long bath. Why not? There was no one to interrupt her now. She filled the tub with hot water, adding lavender-scented bubbles that rose in soft peaks. Steam curled through the bathroom as she undressed, dropping her clothes in a heap on the floor. The water embraced her as she sank into it, tension melting from her shoulders. Emma closed her eyes, letting her mind wander. It had been so long since she'd been touched by a man. Robert had been gone for years, and dating as a single mother hadn't been her priority. But now, with Jack away at college, loneliness crept in during quiet moments like these. Her hands moved across her skin, tracing patterns through the bubbles. She allowed herself to imagine a lover's touch, someone who desired her, who saw her as more than just someone's mother or ex-wife. Her breathing deepened as her fingers explored, eyes closed tight as she focused on the sensations building within her. Lost in her private moment, Emma didn't hear the front door open, didn't hear the sound of bags dropping in the hallway, didn't hear her name being called. "Mom, you home?" Jack's voice echoed through the house. Emma's eyes flew open, but before she could respond, the bathroom door swung open. Jack stood frozen in the doorway, his face immediately flushing bright red. "Oh my God," he shouted, spinning around so quickly he nearly fell. "I'm sorry." Emma sank deeper into the bubbles, mortified. "Jack, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at college." "Surprise visit home for the weekend," he called through the now-closed door, his voice strained with embarrassment. "I texted you, but I guess you didn't see it." Emma's heart pounded. She reached for her phone on the bathroom counter and saw 3 unread messages from Jack about coming home to surprise her. "Just give me a minute," she called out, water sloshing as she hurriedly got out of the tub. She grabbed her robe, hands shaking slightly as she tied it around her waist. When she emerged from the bathroom, Jack was in the kitchen, intently focused on unpacking groceries as if it was the most fascinating task in the world. His ears were still red. "I brought someone with me," he said without looking up. "Hope that's okay." Emma froze. "Someone's here, now." Jack nodded toward the living room, and Emma turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man standing awkwardly by the couch. He had kind eyes and a 5 o'clock shadow that suited his strong jawline. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Thomas," he said with a warm smile that reached his eyes. "Jack's roommate. Sorry for the unexpected arrival." Emma tightened her robe, acutely aware of her wet hair and flushed face. "Please call me Emma, and it's certainly a surprise." Thomas held her gaze a moment longer than necessary before looking away. "Jack talks about you all the time. It's nice to finally meet you." There was something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her that made Emma feel suddenly self-conscious. Not in the way she'd felt when Jack had walked in on her, but different, like she was being truly seen for the first time in years. "I'll go get dressed," Emma said softly, backing toward her bedroom. "Make yourselves at home." As she closed her bedroom door, she leaned against it and took a deep breath. This weekend had suddenly become very complicated. Emma changed quickly into jeans and a soft blue sweater, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She brushed her damp hair and applied a touch of lip gloss before taking a deep breath and returning to face her unexpected guests. In the kitchen, Jack was showing Thomas around as if he owned the place. The easy friendship between them was obvious as they laughed and bumped shoulders while putting groceries away. I thought I'd cook dinner tonight, Jack announced when he saw Emma. His tone was too bright, clearly trying to move past the awkward bathroom incident. Thomas is actually pretty good in the kitchen. Thomas smiled shyly. I worked in a restaurant through my first degree. Nothing fancy, but I can make a decent pasta. First degree? Emma asked, leaning against the counter. Thomas is older than most of the other students, Jack explained. He went back to school after. After 5 years in the military, Thomas finished. I'm 29, a bit of a late bloomer academically. Emma felt a small flutter in her chest. 29, not a boy like most of Jack's friends. A man with experience, with life behind his eyes. Well, I'm happy to have someone cook for me for a change, she said, trying to sound casual. Can I help with anything? Thomas handed her a bottle of wine. You could open this. Jack says you prefer red. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Emma felt a warmth spread up her arm. She turned away quickly to find the corkscrew, feeling Thomas's eyes on her back. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Thomas told stories about his time in the service that made them both laugh. He had a way of speaking that drew Emma in, thoughtful and direct, with none of the awkward energy of younger men. So what do you do, Emma? Thomas asked as they finished eating. I'm an interior designer. I work mainly from home now, but I have a small office downtown. Mom's amazing, Jack said proudly. She did the Henderson house. You know, the one on that architecture blog you follow. Thomas's eyes widened. That was yours? The restoration of the Victorian with the modern elements? That's incredible work. Emma blushed at his genuine admiration. It had been a long time since someone had shown real interest in her career. I'd love to see some of your other projects sometime, Thomas said, his eyes never leaving hers. Jack yawned dramatically. I'm beat from the drive. Think I'll turn in early. He stood, collecting plates. Thomas, you good with the guest room? Perfect. Thanks for dinner, both of you. After Jack went upstairs, Emma and Thomas cleaned the kitchen together, moving around each other in a dance that felt strangely familiar. When they reached for the same dish towel, their hands touched again. This time, neither pulled away immediately. I should apologize, Thomas said quietly, for barging in on you like this. It's Jack's home too, Emma replied. He's welcome any time. Still, I feel like we invaded your privacy. His eyes were warm and sincere. Everyone needs space to just be themselves. The way he said it made Emma wonder if he somehow knew what she'd been doing when they arrived. The thought sent heat rushing to her face. Another glass of wine, she offered, changing the subject. They settled on the couch with their drinks, a respectable distance between them. Emma found herself telling Thomas about her divorce, about raising Jack alone, about rediscovering herself now that her son was grown. It must be strange, Thomas said, having your life defined by being someone's mother for so long, and then suddenly having to remember who you were before that, or figure out who you are now. Exactly, Emma whispered, surprised by how perfectly he'd understood. Most people don't get that. I had to redefine myself after the military, he shared. It's not the same, but I understand what it's like to lose an identity you've built everything around. As they talked, Emma found herself stealing glances at his hands, strong and capable, and the way his shirt stretched across his broad shoulders. When he laughed, the corners of his eyes crinkled in a way that made her stomach tighten. The clock on the wall showed it was past midnight when Emma finally stood. I should get some sleep. Thank you for the conversation. It's been nice to talk to someone who understands. Thomas rose, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne. Thank you for welcoming me into your home. For a moment, they stood in silence, something unspoken passing between them. Emma felt drawn to him, like a physical pull she had to resist. Good night, Thomas, she said softly, stepping back. Good night, Emma, he replied, his voice low and warm. Emma woke early the next morning, sunlight streaming through her curtains. She lay still for a moment, remembering the events of the previous day and the unexpected guests in her home. Particularly Thomas with his kind eyes and the way he had looked at her. The house was quiet as she slipped on her robe and made her way to the kitchen. To her surprise, Thomas was already there, wearing sweatpants and a fitted t-shirt that showed off his athletic build. He stood at the counter, measuring coffee grounds. Good morning, he said, his voice still rough with sleep. Hope I didn't wake you. No, I'm always up early, Emma replied, suddenly conscious of her messy hair and bare face. You didn't have to make coffee. Consider it a small thank you for letting me crash here. Thomas smiled, and Emma felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. They sat at the kitchen island with their coffee, the morning silence comfortable between them. Emma learned that Thomas was studying architecture, which explained his interest in her design work. His passion when he spoke about buildings and spaces made his eyes light up. Jack mentioned you might be hiking today, Thomas said. It's something I've missed since starting school, getting outdoors. There's a beautiful trail not far from here, Emma replied. You're welcome to join me if you'd like. Jack wandered in, hair sticking up in all directions just as they were making plans. Hiking? Count me out. Some friends are getting together to watch the game. He yawned, pouring himself coffee. But you two should go. Mom loves having someone to drag along on those trails. An hour later, Emma and Thomas were walking side by side through woods painted in autumn colors. The cool air carried the scent of earth and fallen leaves. Emma had chosen her most flattering hiking clothes, leggings that hugged her curves and a jacket that brought out the green in her eyes. Your son is a good kid, Thomas said as they climbed a steep section of trail. He talks about you all the time. All good things, I hope, Emma laughed. The best. He admires you a lot. Thomas reached out to help her over a fallen tree, his hand warm and strong around hers. He didn't let go immediately when she was safely across. I can see why. The trail led them to a lookout point with views across the valley, trees spreading out below them in a patchwork of red and gold. They sat on a rocky outcrop, shoulders almost touching. It's beautiful, Thomas said, but when Emma turned, she found him looking at her instead of the view. Her heart raced. It had been so long since she'd felt this kind of tension, this pull toward another person. The way he looked at her made Emma feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. I should tell you something, Thomas said, his voice serious. I asked Jack if I could come home with him this weekend. Oh, Emma tried to keep her voice steady. He talks about you so much, I was curious. But, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I didn't expect to feel this connection with you. Emma looked down at her hands. Thomas, I'm 40. I'm Jack's mother. And I'm 29, not some college kid with a crush. His hand moved to cover hers. Age is just a number once you've lived a little, and I've lived enough to know when I meet someone special. The touch of his hand sent warmth through her body. Emma knew she should pull away, remind him of all the reasons this was complicated. Instead, she turned her palm up, letting their fingers intertwine. This is crazy, she whispered. Maybe, but does it feel wrong? It didn't, that was the surprising part. Sitting here with Thomas felt more right than anything had in years. A cool breeze swept over them and Emma shivered. Thomas moved closer, his arm coming around her shoulders. The warmth of his body against hers was intoxicating. We should head back, Emma said reluctantly, though she made no move to stand. We should, Thomas agreed, also staying put. When he finally turned to face her, their faces were inches apart. Emma could see each of his eyelashes, the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his lips parted slightly as he looked at her. Emma, he said her name like a question. She answered by closing the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a soft, tentative kiss. Thomas's hand came up to cup her cheek, deepening the kiss with a gentleness that made her melt against him. When they broke apart, Emma felt dizzy. Thomas rested his forehead against hers, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. We really should head back, he said, his voice husky. Emma nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As they walked down the trail, their hands found each other again, fingers laced together. Every brush of his thumb across her skin sent sparks through her body. The walk back to the house was filled with shy glances and occasional touches. Emma and Thomas moved in comfortable silence, processing what had happened between them on the mountain. When their hands brushed against each other, neither pulled away. As they approached the house, Emma spotted Jack's car in the driveway. Reality came crashing back, and she stepped slightly away from Thomas. He noticed and gave her an understanding nod. We should talk about this, he said quietly as they reached the front door. I know, Emma replied. But not now. Inside, Jack was sprawled on the couch watching TV with two of his high school friends. They barely looked up when Emma and Thomas entered, too engrossed in the game on screen. How was the hike? Jack asked absently. Beautiful, Thomas answered, his eyes finding Emma's. Your mom knows all the best trails. Emma excused herself to shower, needing time alone with her thoughts. Under the warm water, she replayed the kiss over and over. Thomas's gentle touch, the way his lips felt against hers, how right it had seemed despite all the reasons it shouldn't. She was Jack's mother. Thomas was Jack's roommate. The complications were endless. Yet her body hummed with an energy she hadn't felt in years. Being desired again, feeling that spark of connection, it awakened something in her she thought had died with her marriage. When Emma emerged from her bedroom later, she found Thomas in the kitchen preparing dinner alone. Jack and his friends went out for pizza, he explained, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. I thought I'd make us something. Us? Emma repeated softly, testing the word. Thomas set down his knife and turned to face her. Emma, if you want to pretend that kiss never happened, I understand. The last thing I want is to make things awkward for you or Jack. Emma moved closer, drawn to him despite her better judgment. Is that what you want? To pretend it never happened? No, he said simply. What I want is to kiss you again. The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. Emma glanced toward the front door, knowing Jack could return any minute. This is complicated, she whispered. Life usually is. Thomas took her hand, running his thumb across her knuckles. But sometimes complicated things are worth exploring. Emma looked up at him, at the warmth in his eyes and the curve of his mouth. Before she could overthink it, she rose onto her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was deeper this time, less tentative. Thomas's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him. Emma's hands found his shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath his shirt. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Thomas's eyes had darkened, and the look he gave her sent heat through Emma's body. Jack, she started. Won't be home for hours, Thomas finished. But we can just talk, if that's all you want. Emma laughed softly. Talking is not all I want. They managed to finish cooking dinner together, though it took twice as long with frequent pauses for kisses and touches. They ate at the kitchen island, sitting close enough that their legs touched beneath the counter. Thomas told her more about his life, his childhood in a small town, his time in the military, his dreams of designing buildings that would last for generations. Emma found herself opening up too, sharing hopes and fears she'd never voiced aloud, how sometimes she felt invisible as she got older, how she worried about being alone, how she was trying to rediscover who she was outside of being a mother. You're extraordinary, Thomas told her, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Jack is lucky to have you, but you're so much more than just his mom. After dinner, they moved to the couch with glasses of wine. What started as sitting side by side evolved as Thomas put his arm around her shoulders and Emma leaned into him. His hand traced patterns on her arm, each touch leaving goosebumps in its wake. When he kissed her again, Emma felt herself melting against him. Thomas's kisses moved from her lips to her jaw, then down the sensitive skin of her neck. Emma gasped, her fingers threading into his hair. We should stop, she murmured, even as she tilted her head to give him better access. Tell me to, and I will, Thomas replied against her skin. Instead, Emma guided his face back to hers, capturing his mouth in a hungry kiss. Her hands explored the broad plains of his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. Thomas's own hands stayed respectfully at her waist, though she could feel the restraint in his touch. The sound of a car door slamming outside broke them apart. Emma jumped up, straightening her clothes as headlights swept across the living room window. Jack, she said, catching her breath. Thomas stood too, running a hand through his mussed hair. Perfect timing, he said with a rueful smile. The next morning, Emma woke to the sounds of movement in the kitchen. She lay in bed for a few moments, memories of Thomas's kisses still fresh in her mind. They had managed to act normal when Jack returned last night, but the heated glances they exchanged when Jack wasn't looking had left her restless all night. She dressed carefully, choosing a soft sweater that highlighted her figure, and made her way to the kitchen. Both men were there, Jack making coffee while Thomas cooked breakfast. The domesticity of the scene made her heart squeeze. Morning, Mom, Jack said, sliding a mug toward her. Thomas looked up from the stove, his eyes warming as they met hers. Good morning, Emma. The way he said her name, like it was something precious, made her cheeks flush. She took a seat at the counter, watching Thomas move around her kitchen with easy confidence. "So," Jack said, leaning against the counter, "I was thinking we could all do something together today, since we head back to campus tomorrow." Emma felt a pang of disappointment. One more day and Thomas would be gone. "What did you have in mind?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "There's a fall festival in town," Jack suggested. "Food trucks, local music, that kind of thing." The day at the festival passed in a blur of autumn colors, delicious food, and stolen moments. While Jack chatted with former classmates they ran into, Thomas and Emma wandered through craft booths, standing close enough that their hands occasionally brushed. Each brief touch sent electricity through Emma's body. "I don't want tomorrow to come," Thomas admitted quietly as they watched a local band perform. Jack had gone to get drinks, leaving them momentarily alone. "Me neither," Emma replied. "But what is this really? A weekend fling?" Thomas turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Is that what you think this is?" Before she could answer, Jack returned with their drinks. The moment passed, but Thomas's question lingered in Emma's mind throughout the afternoon. As evening approached, Jack announced he was meeting his friends for one last night out before heading back to school. "Don't wait up," he told them with a grin. "Might crash at Ben's if it gets late." And then they were alone. Back at the house, Emma and Thomas moved around each other with nervous energy, both aware of the empty house and the limited time they had left. When Thomas's hand caught hers as she passed him in the hallway, Emma stopped, her heart pounding. "You never answered my question," he said softly. "Is that what you think this is? A fling?" Emma looked up at him, at the earnestness in his eyes. "I don't know what this is, Thomas. You live hours away. You're in college with my son. I'm 40 years old. How could this be anything else?" Instead of answering with words, Thomas leaned down and kissed her. This kiss was different, deeper, more urgent. His hands framed her face as if she were something precious, and Emma melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck. They stumbled backward until Emma's back met the wall. Thomas's body pressed against hers, solid and warm. His kisses moved to her neck, and Emma gasped as he found a sensitive spot below her ear. "I've wanted to do this since the moment I saw you," he murmured against her skin. Emma's fingers tangled in his hair, holding him close. "We shouldn't," she whispered, even as her body arched into his. Thomas pulled back slightly, his breathing ragged. "Do you want me to stop?" Emma looked into his eyes, seeing desire and something deeper there. She shook her head slowly. "No, I don't want you to stop." That was all the permission Thomas needed. He lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her toward her bedroom. They fell onto her bed together, hands exploring, breaths mingling. "Are you sure?" Thomas asked, hovering above her. "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time," Emma replied, pulling him down to her. What followed was a revelation. Thomas worshipped her body with a patience and attention that made Emma feel both beautiful and desperate. His hands and mouth seemed to know exactly where to touch, how much pressure to apply. When they finally came together, Emma felt tears prick her eyes at the intensity of it. Afterward, they lay tangled in her sheets, Emma's head on Thomas's chest as he traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "That," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "was definitely not a fling." Emma propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Then what is it?" "The beginning of something," Thomas replied, his fingers gently tucking her hair behind her ear. "If you want it to be." The vulnerability in his voice made Emma's heart ache. She leaned down to kiss him softly. "I do, but Jack." "We'll need time to understand," Thomas finished. "I know, and I'm willing to give him that time. To give you both that time." Emma woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom curtains and the warmth of Thomas's body pressed against her back. His arm was draped over her waist, holding her close even in sleep. For a moment, she simply enjoyed the feeling, the comfort of being held by someone who wanted her. Then reality crashed in. Today was Sunday. Thomas and Jack would be heading back to campus, and Jack had no idea what had happened between his mother and his roommate. As if sensing her thoughts, Thomas stirred behind her, his lips pressed against her shoulder in a gentle kiss. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. Emma turned in his arms to face him. He looked younger in the morning light, his hair mussed and stubble darkening his jaw, but his eyes, when they opened to meet hers, held the same warmth that had drawn her to him from the start. "Morning," she replied, allowing herself one more moment of contentment before the complications of the day ahead. "Did you sleep well?" Thomas smiled, pulling her closer. "Better than I have in years." They kissed slowly, savoring the connection, both aware of the limited time they had left. When Thomas's hand began to wander, tracing the curve of her hip, Emma melted into his touch. Their lovemaking was gentle this time, a contrast to the urgency of the night before. Every touch felt like a promise, every kiss a question about what would come next. Afterward, as they lay catching their breath, Emma heard the front door open. Jack's voice called out, "Mom, I'm back." They froze, staring at each other with wide eyes. "I'll be out in a minute, honey," Emma called back, already scrambling for her clothes. Thomas dressed quickly, pressing one last kiss to her lips before slipping out of her bedroom and into the guest room. Emma took a moment to straighten her bed and check her appearance in the mirror before heading to the kitchen. Jack was making coffee, looking tired but happy from his night out with friends. "Thomas still sleeping?" he asked casually. "I'm here," Thomas said, entering the kitchen as if he'd just woken up. He gave Emma a polite nod, though his eyes lingered on her face a moment too long. They ate breakfast together, the air charged with unspoken secrets. Emma caught Thomas watching her when Jack wasn't looking, small smiles passing between them that felt both thrilling and terrifying. As Jack packed his things, Thomas found Emma alone in the laundry room, folding towels. "We need to talk about this," he said quietly, closing the door partway. "About us? Is there an us?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. Thomas took her hands in his. "I want there to be. I know it's complicated with Jack, with distance, with everything, but what I feel for you, it's real, Emma." "It's only been 2 days," she reminded him, though her heart raced at his words. "Sometimes 2 days is enough to know." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to see where this could go." Before Emma could respond, Jack's voice called out, asking if anyone had seen his charger. Thomas stepped back, but not before pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. The time for goodbyes came too soon. Jack hugged his mother tightly, promising to call more often. When it was Thomas's turn, he embraced her formally, though his eyes said much more. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said, his voice carrying a deeper meaning that only Emma understood. "You're welcome anytime," she replied, meaning every word. As they loaded the car, Thomas handed Emma a folded piece of paper. "My number," he explained, "and my email, in case you want to reach me when I'm not with Jack." Their fingers touched longer than necessary during the exchange. Emma tucked the paper into her pocket, already knowing she would use it. Just as they were about to drive away, Jack ran back into the house for something he'd forgotten. Thomas took the opportunity to step close to Emma one last time. "I'm going to miss you," he said softly. "I'll miss you too," Emma admitted, allowing herself to be honest about her feelings. "Can I call you tonight?" Emma nodded, unable to resist the hope in his eyes. "I'd like that." The sound of Jack returning made them step apart. Final goodbyes were said, and Emma stood in the driveway watching the car disappear down the street, Thomas's face visible in the passenger window until the last moment. Back inside her empty house, Emma felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness at Thomas's departure, worry about Jack's reaction if he ever found out, but also a bubbling excitement she hadn't felt in years. She pulled Thomas's note from her pocket, running her fingers over his handwriting. Emma had expected to feel guilt, but instead she felt alive. Whatever was happening between her and Thomas, it had awakened something in her that had been dormant for too long. 2 months had passed since that unexpected weekend. Emma's phone buzzed beside her as she worked on design plans for a new client. Thomas's name lit up the screen, bringing a smile to her face instantly. Their nightly calls had become the highlight of her days, their connection growing stronger despite the distance. They had been careful. Thomas visited her only when Jack had other plans or was away for weekends. Emma drove to meet him in a town halfway between her home and his campus twice. Each reunion was more intense than the last, their time together precious and never quite enough. But secrets had a way of surfacing, and Emma had been wrestling with guilt about keeping this from Jack. She and Thomas had discussed it countless times. Tonight, as they spoke on the phone, the subject arose again. He deserves to know, Emma said, curled up on her couch in the soft lamplight. But I'm afraid of hurting him. I know, Thomas replied, his voice warm in her ear. And if you want to end this to protect your relationship with him, I'd understand. The thought of ending things with Thomas made Emma's chest tighten painfully. That's not what I want, she admitted. But I need to be honest with my son. Fall break is next weekend, Thomas reminded her. Jack mentioned he's coming home. Maybe it's time. Emma took a deep breath. Maybe it is. The week passed too quickly. Emma cleaned the house nervously, changing her outfit 3 times before Jack was due to arrive. Thomas would come the next day, giving Emma time to talk to her son first. When Jack walked through the door, Emma hugged him tightly, savoring the familiar comfort of holding her child. They spent the evening catching up, and Emma found herself searching his face for hints of the man he was becoming. He seemed more mature somehow, more settled in himself. As they finished dinner, Emma took a steadying breath. Jack, there's something I need to talk to you about. He looked up curious. Everything okay, Mom? Yes. Well, I hope so. Emma's hands twisted in her lap. It's about Thomas. Jack's expression shifted, a hint of something unreadable crossing his face. What about him? Since you both visited, we've been talking, getting to know each other better. Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then, to Emma's surprise, he sighed and said, I know, Mom. Emma stared at him. You know. Thomas told me last week. Jack ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly very adult. He said he needed to be honest with me, that he cares about you too much to keep sneaking around. Tears pricked at Emma's eyes. Thomas had taken that risk, had put himself on the line to spare her this conversation. Are you angry? She asked softly. Jack considered this. I was weird about it at first, he admitted. It's not exactly normal to have your roommate dating your mom. He gave a small laugh. But Thomas is a good guy, and you deserve to be happy. Emma reached across the table to take her son's hand. You're my priority, Jack. Always have been, always will be. I know that. He squeezed her hand. And I'm not a kid anymore. I can handle my mom having a life of her own. Relief washed over Emma, along with a surge of love for her son, who was showing her such graceful understanding. The next day, Thomas arrived with a nervous energy that dissipated the moment Jack greeted him with a casual fist bump. The 3 of them spent the day together, finding a new dynamic that felt surprisingly natural. When Jack announced he was going out with friends that evening, he gave Thomas a pointed look and said, Take care of her, man, before heading out the door. Alone at last, Emma fell into Thomas's arms. You told him, she whispered against his chest. I had to. Thomas's hands stroked her back gently. I couldn't keep lying to him, and I couldn't risk losing what we're building. Emma looked up at him, heart full. And what exactly are we building, Thomas? His eyes were serious as they met hers. A future, I hope? If that's what you want too. Instead of answering with words, Emma kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the connection between them. Thomas lifted her easily, carrying her to her bedroom where they lost themselves in each other, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets and twilight shadows, Thomas traced the curve of Emma's face with gentle fingers. I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly. I think I have been since that first weekend. Emma felt tears well in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. I'm falling in love with you too. Thomas pulled her closer, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. Then we'll figure out the rest together, day by day. Emma thought about the path that had led her here, from the embarrassment of that first unexpected moment when Jack walked in on her, to this profound connection that had awakened her heart. Life had a strange way of bringing gifts in unexpected packages. Day by day, she agreed, reaching up to kiss him once more. Outside her window, the autumn leaves danced in the evening breeze. Inside, Emma had found a new beginning she never could have imagined. Not an ending to her role as a mother, but an expansion of her life to include something just for her. Something beautiful, unexpected, and entirely worth the journey.